It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein and the resurgent and regenerated Robert Begley. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably Robert Begley. How you doing today, Robert?
Oh, Andy, I'm doing great. Talk about resurgent. Happy to celebrate a hero who turns like 89 in a couple of months. I mean, wow, what a lifespan.
Yes, yes. And we're talking about Dr. Leonard Peikoff, of course, not just
Mhm.
Ayn Rand's leading student and author of, the definitive nonfiction presentation of Ayn Rand's philosophy,
Yes.
that is Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, known affectionately as OPAR, but also an
Yeah.
outstanding and brilliant philosopher in his own right. And the dim hypothesis is I think is a brilliant contribution to the history of Western philosophy. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah, that is a
And his
brilliantly
first
original.
book as well. Might as well plug that too.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss the ominous parallels because I
Yeah.
think this is overshadowed by Opar. I think of this as Ampar, ominous parallels or Ampar. Book is overshadowed, but it's a brilliant and prescient work on political philosophy, and I think
Yeah.
really captures.
Hmm.
1983 was the pub date. It was 1982, 80 or 83. It's roughly 40 years, and it has really predicted. It predicted 40 years ago what America is becoming today. So it's prescient,
Sadly, yeah.
prescient book. Yeah, sadly. So Leonard Peikoff, born 1933, right in Canada, and
That's right. Winnipeg.
Winnipeg. All right. Before we get into the details, we did a hero show episode last year on Dr. Thomas Sowell, who I think has just turned 92. So
Wow.
two,
Yeah.
yeah,
Living legends.
two living legends. Hopefully, they both rock on in good health, for years to come. So, what do we
Yeah.
know about Leonard Peikoff's childhood, Robert?
Born in Canada, it's cold. And his father was a doctor, Samuel Peikoff, mother band leader. And he, from birth, pretty much he was going to be a doctor. That was his thing. His father worked all the time, incredible work ethic, and went to pre med school in University of Manitoba until he was 17 years old. And then his aunt invited him to meet Ayn Rand in Southern California in 1951. And nothing was the same after that. He describes the story very well, Andy. I'm sure you know it. This long drive. He had read The Fountainhead many times. And he was excited to meet Rand. And when they arrive in her home, he stays in the car. He's like, I can't do it. And he's like, forget it. I'm coming in. And he comes in and they start with this chitter chatter. And he's like, let's get down to business. Is Howard Rourke practical or moral? Because you can't be both, basically. And she was impressed with that from a 17-year-old. And they just went on with the discussion. He says she kind of ignored the other people in the small circle. And he went back home saying, this is my life will never be the same again, and had already committed to going to school. He had 2 more years of college, but his father told him that, by the way, there's a video, Leonard Peikoff in his own words. That's where I got some of this biographical material. But his father said, okay, get this philosophy stuff out of your system. Go to New York, go to NYU, meet this woman, and you'll be coming back, begging for medicine. Well, do you think that happened?
That's right. Well, he went to New York City. Went to college at New York University and NYU, majored in philosophy, and I think undergraduate and graduate school at NYU. Right, got his PhD in
Yes,
philosophy from
that's
from
right.
NYU, and
Cindy
and
Hook,
studied
right?
studied with some of the leading American philosophers were at NYU at that time. William Barrett, the existentialist and author of Irrational Man, Sidney
Irrational
Hook.
Man.
Yeah, yeah, but I vaguely remember Leonard saying things that were positive about Barrett. I think in his interactions with Professor Barrett, but that goes back to lectures and Q and answer sessions a long time ago, so I could be misremembering. But Sidney Hook, yeah, of course, the former Marxist, pragmatist philosopher who wrote a book on heroes, was the amongst his other works, the hero in
Mm-hmm.
history, which I cited in my book on heroes. But anyhow, yeah. So Dr. Peikoff got his PhD in philosophy at NYU, and of course did his real studying with Ayn Rand, studying
Yeah.
philosophy, studying philosophy with her. So that's quite an education that he got from the greatest Ayn Rand, in my judgment, of course, the greatest philosopher in the past millennium, probably since Thomas Aquinas.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the fortunate things when he met Rand and started seeing her somewhat regularly, she was still writing Atlas Shrugged. So he got to see it before it was on the bookshelves and in stores. And that you can imagine that being an incredible experience. And then if we go ahead to the 60s, he graduates and now he wants to teach. And the movement, the objectivist movement, is in its early stages, but it's gaining traction. And all the different professions of the collective.
Unfortunately, it still is in its early stages. But but hopefully it grows, more rapidly in the
Temporarily,
future.
I'll say that. Yeah,
Yeah, oh, yeah, okay,
temporarily
you're
in
right.
its
Okay,
early
right.
stage. Yeah, I was starting to write her fiction. She had the Objectivist newsletter, the Objectivist publications that were coming out, and but there was the economist Alan Greenspan. There was Nathaniel Branden, psychologist, Barbara Branden, writer. Peikoff was the philosopher. He was like really the philosopher. Alan Godelf too, but Peikoff was that was like his real, you know, objectivism is a philosophy, and he was the philosopher. So that bond certainly continued on. And I think in the 60s, the two of them, Godelf and Peikoff, persuaded Ayn Rand to write about epistemology, to write about her own epistemology, which would become Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology.
Yeah, and Alan Godhealth, of course, the late great Alan Godhealth, who we
Yeah.
miss, was a
Mm-hmm.
brilliant Aristotle scholar, and
That's right.
but Leonard Peikoff was more of the generalist in philosophy
Yes,
and
he
the
was.
history of philosophy, and really, I think was the best suited to see Ayn Rand's place in the history of philosophy. And I just want to, say something here about his work in the history of philosophy. W.T. Jones, A History of Western Philosophy in 5 volumes, is one of the
Yes.
definitive go-to sources for the history of philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
which I use a lot, and I think it's outstanding. But Leonard Peikoff's History of Philosophy courses, History of Ancient Philosophy and History of Modern Philosophy, are the most brilliant, in my judgment, the most brilliant works in the history of philosophy ever written or composed in any way, shape, or form. I was a lessee for Leonard
Me
Peikoff's
too.
courses.
In the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah,
Had people
80s,
come to my
exactly.
apartment. Yep.
Right. Right. And so as a lessee, one of the benefits was you could listen to the lectures as many times as you want. And I was in grad school, then I would go through them over and over and over again, just taking copious notes. I learned the history of philosophy from Leonard Peikoff much more than from in graduate school. But I hope someday some objectivist scholar writes up those courses and publishes them in their
Mm-hmm.
entirety, in book form. So so that so that we have them in, I'm a dinosaur, but I like to have books. I like to be able to mark, underline
Yeah.
and mark them up. Have them in book form, the way W.T. Jones 5 volumes, A History of Western Philosophy, is in book form, because it's the most brilliant. It's the most brilliant work in the history of philosophy. Now it's available. It's available on CD from the Ayn Rand Institute, isn't it? I think it is.
Yeah, and streaming. You can buy the MP3 downloads, and they even have YouTube. They've shrunk down some of the YouTube videos, some of the sections into
Yeah,
YouTube,
well,
and
no, it's great. It's great to have it in these multimedia forms. But I'm hoping one day some scholar, philosophy scholar at ARI or somewhere else, actually writes it down, transcribes it into book form, because it would be nice to have it in that form. Also, have it in
it,
libraries and everything.
you're absolutely right, Andy. Because if we go personally, my first introduction to Peikoff was 1983. In fact, when I met you, Understanding Objectivism.
Right.
I got to admit, I didn't even
At,
know there was a movement. I
at the
thought I read Ayn Rand, and that was the only
Roosevelt Hotel on Madison Avenue, right?
the
Don't forget.
Roosevelt Hotel, Madison Avenue. And
Yeah.
when I read Rand, I thought I was the only one who got it. Only after she died did I learn that there was a movement, and then I got on some mailing list. And September of '83 was Understanding Objectivism. And Andy, I'll never forget. I come into this room, and there's hundreds of people in the Roosevelt Hotel, and Peikoff starts off by saying, "This is an advanced course in objectivism. So if you're brand new, we'll give you your money back if you want to leave." And I said, "There's no way I'm leaving this this place. I'm here. I don't care if
Right.
everything's over my head. I'm staying.
Yeah.
Like I
No, I
want to
hear
just
you. No, I
grab what
know.
I can." And but the point is, Andy, they did convert that course into a book. So your point about perhaps transcribing or turning some of his lectures into a book, that could happen. So
Yeah.
and his courses are the thing. If we just talk about his achievements, major achievements, those courses on history of philosophy, introduction to logic, objective communication. As a tape lessee, we rented them all out, right? I would just go down the line and just cycle them with people in New York City would come to my apartment and listen to them over and over again. But the two main ones, the philosophy of objectivism. Well, the one 1976, I think it was, when Ayn Rand was in the audience and took part in the Q&A for the last like 5 or 6 um, sessions. That's the one that he took and essentially they developed and unpacked to turn into the systematic book, OPAR, Objectivism, Philosophy of Ayn Rand.
Right. Right. And then he reprised the PO course, the philosophy of objectivism course, 2 years later in the fall of 1978. So I was in grad school then, and that's when I first
Okay.
met Leonard Peikoff. So I could, we have some
Mm-hmm.
personal anecdotes here. So he used to
Yeah.
give these courses on Tuesday night, right? So I think it started in October, or at least at least it ran through October. So in October 1978, the Yankees are playing Kansas City in the ALCS, the American League
Yes.
Championship Series.
Yes. Yeah.
I can't miss Leonard Peikoff on
Mm-hmm.
objectivism. That's got to come first, no matter how big Yankee fan I was. So I went to the lectures. Fortunately, the Yankees won. The next Tuesday night they play in the Dodgers in the World Series again.
Well,
Yeah, I gotta go to Leonard's lectures. I gotta miss you missed the
Reggie hitting 3 home runs, right?
that was the year before. That was in '77. Um,
Okay, right. But they beat the Dodgers 2 years in a row.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
2 years
Mm-hmm.
in a row. Right, they won the
Yeah.
World Series. Yeah. But anyhow, you know,
Yeah.
not all important things are equally important.
Yes.
And
Yes.
in fact, when you're
Yeah.
talking about your education and your career, baseball should be, unless you're going to be involved in baseball professionally, it should be way down the
Right.
list. But I just
Mm.
want to say one thing. I mean, Leonard Pico's the most brilliant lecturer I've ever heard. Period. Right? He's the most brilliant lecturer. I'll say that again. He's the most brilliant lecturer I've ever heard. Period. By like whole orders of magnitude. He is simply sui generis. He's just in a class by himself.
Mm.
And on top of that, he's just got a great sense of humor. I mean, he's very funny. He's my favorite. I think I mentioned this when we did the actually I don't know if I mentioned it or not when we did the birthday party from last year, but this was off the
Mm-hmm.
cuff in a Q&A session. And I went to so many of his lectures. In the '70s, he was lecturing at the old Statler Hilton on 7th Avenue, right across from the
Yes.
Garden
Man,
in
Madison
the
Square Garden.
ballroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, big ballroom, always filled, like you said. And somebody asked him in one of those Q&As. He said about dreams. That Freud's interpretation of dreams is very sexual and everything. And what do you think about this? And Leonard said something like, "Well, I'm not a psychologist or anything," but he said, "I don't think dreams, just personally, I don't think dreams are overtly sexual in that way." He said, "Now, on the other hand," he said, if you dream about hot dogs chasing bagels through Central Park, there might be some sexual connotations to that." I mean, people just like fell out of their chairs laughing. The
That's
imagery,
good.
the imagery is so
Yeah.
vivid.
Hmm.
It's, but
Hmm.
he is the most brilliant lecturer and the wittiest. So that's and he's got a lot of energy on top of everything else. So that is a very winning combination.
Yeah. So if we go from the late 70s, he's giving these courses on objectivism, on, as I said, communication. And Ayn Rand is getting older, and she's, in her last years, he was the guy. He was basically the person that she was designating as her heir. She didn't have family. Frank O'Connor had died before, and it must have been just incredibly tough to see this intellectual giant, ending her life, and now you're given this burden. But as you said, we mentioned the ominous parallels, and she did read that. She did live to see that completed, and she hailed it as a great work of
Yes.
of objectivism, a great work of a philosopher that's not done by me. It's kind of like what is it Dagny with
Yeah,
Stadler and Atlas
Robert
Shrugged?
Stadler.
It's
Yeah.
right. It's so great to see a work that was done not by me. And Rand got to see that, and that was fabulous. And then he continued her legacy. This was one of the things I would do in the 1980s, was going up to the Fort Hall Forum every year. She would give a
Mhm.
talk up there, usually in April, and he continued that. And my first one was 1984, Why Johnny Can't Think, and continued that on through. That became one of his traditional events as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can remember uh, after his logic course was complete. Was that 1980? I
Hmm.
think. Then he did an advanced logic course, and it developed into a grammar course in his apartment for like
Yes,
25 to 30 students. And I
right.
was fortunate enough to to be one of them. And I remember
Principles of
going,
grammar. Mhm.
yeah. And I think,
Mhm.
or maybe, oh no, maybe it was the objective. No, it was the objective communication course. I think he did. I
Objective
think he did.
communication was 1980. I know that because
Yeah,
Rand was
1980.
there for the session.
Yeah, objective communication. Right, it
Hmm.
was 1980. Then he did an advanced objective communication course in his apartment for 25 or 30 students. And I think that developed into the grammar course, as I remember. Um,
Hmm.
but I was fortunate enough to be there, and I remember going to Leonard's apartment on Third Avenue in Murray Hill, and
Yeah.
it was just there were plants everywhere, and cats, and the place was just teeming with life. The green plants,
Yeah.
the cats. You look
Hmm.
out, and you had this. He was up on like I think I forget what floor it was on, but it was in a high rise apartment. He was up high, and you had the beautiful wraparound view, of New York City at night. It was just stunning, and the place teeming with life. Leonard's brilliant lecturing again added to the vitality of the
Hmm.
intellectual life. And since this was the summer of 1980, Ayn Rand was still alive, and she appeared, for questions one night. And normally when Leonard was done lecturing, everybody would run up to him to ask him questions. That one night when he was done lecturing, everyone ran over to Ayn Rand, to ask,
Right.
ask
Uh-huh.
her ask her questions. So I have some of these great some of these great memories of studying with Leonard Peikoff, and having Ayn Rand right there to ask questions of us. It was a unique
Hmm.
intellectual experience. But his hotel courses, Robert, Statler Hilton, they were like a life preserver to me, because I'm at the CUNY grad school on 42nd Street. It's just, oh
Yeah.
God, it's just the most abysmal experience. Even worse today with the woke Stalinistas in
Yeah.
charge of
Hmm.
humanities programs in universities. But it was bad enough back then, in the late 70s. And Leonard was lecture Tuesday night, and I ran after class. I ran over, from over to 7th Avenue and south down to 33rd Street, to get to the Statler Hill. To say, I gonna hear Leonard Peikoff lecture on objectivism or the history of philosophy. Or I didn't take history of philosophy courses live, but on objectivism, on objective communication, and all these, and of course, like you mentioned, the advanced course, the understanding objectivism course over at the Roosevelt Hotel on the east side. But
Yeah.
I'd run over there. I'd run over there after class. It was like an intellectual and emotional life preserver. Got me through grad school.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
And I remember, Andy, I think it was during understanding of objectivism, he decided to move to California. I think he shortly thereafter he became a father, and I remember him saying, like in one of those Q&As, somebody asked him why California, and he's like, I didn't want my daughter to be like in New York City, because New York in the early '80s was, it's always gone up and down, but it was pretty violent and dangerous, and he's just preferred the West Coast. And then the next time I saw him was 1985, Thomas Jefferson School. And I think he was like a brand new father. I think Kira's daughter was an infant, and then spent pretty much the rest of his life out in Southern California.
Yeah, you mentioned for both of us, one of our favorite movies, The Most Violent Year. With Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain. It's Howard Rourke in the fuel oil industry, right? It's a great film, strongly recommended. As people ask me, is it really violent? I said, no, it's not violent at all. It just takes place in 1981 in New York City, when New York had this very, very high homicide rate. So I can understand why Leonard would want to clear out when he had a young child, a few years after that. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
But
and then also in 1985, that same year of the Jefferson School, is when he helps to found the Ayn Rand Institute. Puts an official organization with her name in it on the map for that purpose of promoting her ideas. And that was certainly a big part of his life at that stage. And then if we go just chronologically, early 90s, 91, he Opar comes out and he's giving courses on it. He's giving, I think you were on some of those phone recording. Phone.
Yes.
Was it for Opar and also for the DIM, right? Was it also for the DIM hypothesis that you were on some of those calls?
And as if I remember correctly, I think that's right. I'm not sure, but I think that's right. I remember being on the phone sessions with him though. I mean, he gave just this ton of great lectures. I remember one of them that stands out in my mind is in '93 in San Francisco, when he did this. He did the 7 great plays, course. Where, because me, as a literature lover, I loved the material. I loved the course. It was just brilliant. It was just brilliantly done, and I'm sure that's available from ARI also.
That's 8. Was it called 7 or 8? Because it's 8 great plays. You can get that on.
8 great plays. Okay,
on recording.
Maybe I'm misremembering the number. Okay, 8 great plays. Even better, right? But Leonard's lecture on that was, the whole lecture course was just brilliant. And I mean, so many topics on he lectured brilliantly on the philosophy of education. He gave a brilliant lecture series on in
1985. That was at Jefferson School. They turned that into a book, Why Johnny Can't Think. So that's largely it came out of that, and also that was his Ford Hall Forum. And
he gave a Ford Hall Forum talk on
the
that.
course, the 5-session course on philosophy of education. And so a lot of his stuff has come out, in written form, which is certainly helpful. Then if we go into the 90s, he was on radio. He was actually on nationally syndicated radio show, and
Yep.
that was, that was an experiment, and he reached some minds. Radio at that time was it was a big medium to get to explain ideas. You don't have 15 minutes to unpack something, but he really enjoyed that while that was going on as well.
Yeah, that started in the early '90s, as I recall, right? And
Hmm.
after he finished Opar, so sometime in the early mid '90s, and by that time, of course, Rush Limbaugh had
Yeah.
become a rock star on political talk
Yes.
radio, and
Hmm.
talk radio got taken over by conservative voices, uh, and so Leonard, agreeing with the conservatives in part anyway on economics, but of course they're religious. He's an
Hmm.
atheist. He's principled individualist, where the conservatives pick and choose where they want to defend individual rights and where they want to violate it.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Hmm.
so Leonard was a principled voice in support of individual rights on talk radio for several years. I don't remember how many years he did the show, but it was a
95
few
to
years.
99. Yeah,
Okay, so it's 4 or 5
1995 to
years.
1999. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm. And I think that turned into a book, Keeping It Real. I'm pretty
right.
sure they took some of those episodes, and then he had a podcast. Okay, so we transitioned from talk radio to podcasts, and that he did from 2007 to 16. I remember when he was finishing that up. Actually, he would take he'd take questions and he would just answer them on the air. And the last time I saw him, I think it was it 2010 at in Las Vegas at a conference in Las Vegas. I think that was his last series of talks on the. I think it was right before, right around Dim Hypothesis, and he said he was not going to be doing like formal courses anymore, and he might have done one or two more things, but that was the last time I saw him, like personally, especially in like a public setting.
Mhm. Yeah, he retired. He was in his late 70s by that. That's 12
Yeah,
years ago. He's about to turn 89, and hopefully in good
yeah,
health, and and still
yep,
going strong. But
hmm,
we should talk about the books a little bit, because
sure,
like I said, I
yeah,
think I think the ominous parallels is a brilliant the end of freedom in America is the subtitle. You can see the swastika
hmm,
superimposed over the
yeah,
American flag. This is a brilliant and sadly prescient book on the state of American culture and where is heading politically.
hmm,
I just want to point out here. I think Leonard shows in this book the dangers of the severe dangers coming from the left. And in that regard, continued Ayn Rand's work, because and Ayn Rand, I remember her saying publicly once, I was there when she said the fight against the communists. She said, "This is my battle." And of course, if you read her
hmm,
novels, every villain without exception is a 20th century collectivist socialist. Everyone. There's no religious villains in her novels. There's hardly even any religious characters. Hopkins
hmm,
Stoddard, Lydia, Kira's sister, who's not a villain. She's harmless, but a harmless
hmm,
Christian. But you know, and yet it's really fascinating, because the focus here is on the evils of the left, and defending freedom from the left. But Ayn Rand was very clear, and so was Leonard Peikoff. Religion is a danger. It's a severe danger. I remember the 1980 presidential election well, when Ayn Rand absolutely categorically refused to support Reagan, urged her
yeah,
fans not to support Reagan. And
hmm,
I mean, I voted for Reagan that year. Hell, I wouldn't I like to have Reagan to vote for today? you know, but but I understood Ayn Rand's point when she said whatever short term gains we'll get from Reagan over Carter will be more than wiped out by the long term result will be the conflation in people's minds of capitalism with Christianity. and that makes
Yeah.
sense. It's true. So anyway, so here's an interesting evolution, Robert and everybody. In ominous parallels, Leonard Peikoff continues Ayn Rand's work. The danger comes from the left, whether the collectivist socialist, national socialism, or communism. But Leonard morphs politically into
Can I just interject?
go
Just
ahead,
set in
go
the
ahead.
context. It's Weimar Germany before Hitler's. It's what Weimar
Right,
Germany was like before Hitler's rise to power, compared to America up until the
right.
1980s. Just saying the context a
Right,
little bit.
and Leonard Peikoff, right? That good point, Robert. Thank you. Leonard Peikoff showing brilliantly that American culture, as he's writing, the '60s, '70s, early '80s, is we're turning into Weimar America, and even more
Hippie,
so. Yeah,
especially the hippie era.
yeah, right, right, and then Leonard goes through an interesting development. I don't know, late '90s, turn of the 20th century, turn of the 21st century, where we think religion is the real danger, and I
Hmm.
remember 2004. He said, it's immoral for objectivists to
Yeah.
vote for Bush, uh, and 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 then through the Obama years, he seemed to like rethink this again. Yeah, and he may still.
Hmm.
I don't want to put words in Dr. Peikoff's mouth. He may well still think religion long term is the gravest threat, but it sounds like he's saying now that the left short term is is the threat, and the left must be stopped. I mean, he said publicly that he was going to
Yeah.
vote for Trump, and I think he contributed modestly to the
Yeah.
Trump campaign in 2020. So it's interesting because it's there's no doubt that religion's irrational and dangerous. I mean, look at its history. You look at Islam, in our day. But I'm just speaking for myself now and nobody else. To me,
Hmm.
the left is the greater threat, whether it's the communists or the
Yeah.
Nazis. You know,
But
and
also, Andy,
yeah,
thank you, because you mentioned something I wanted to bring up. Because if we just stay in the ominous parallels and people talk about the Nazis, they're called the right. They're
yeah, that's a
supposedly
thing. Yeah,
right wing. So we have to
yeah,
clarify this. We have to
right.
clarify that no,
Yeah,
any
no, that's a good point.
totalitarianism is left, and
Right, that's
and
a good that's a
that's what
good point.
Peikoff's point is.
Yeah, and we could even drop the spatial metaphors, of left wing and right wing. I
Yeah,
personally I like the spatial metaphors as shorthand, but the literal meaning,
yeah,
for left is collectivism and socialism, and the literal meaning for
right.
for
That's right.
right is individualism
Hmm.
and capitalism. So so
Yeah.
left then is just let's just stay with the literal terms here. Collectivism means the group is preeminent over the individual. The individual is subordinate to the group and must serve the group. Socialism, of course, puts it into practice politically. Your life has been socialized. It no longer belongs to you. It now belongs to society. Your life belongs to the state. And so National Social,
Hmm.
the only good thing about National Socialism, amidst all the horrors of it, is that it's well named. National Socialism
Yes.
is the exactly right name. And I don't use the term Nazi anymore. I use the term National
No,
Socialist.
you're
Emphasize to
right.
people
Hmm.
that this is a form of socialism. Nazi is a contraction of National Socialism. And so
Hmm.
in America, the Marxist left, more than the National Socialist left, has been dominant. The National Socialist left had its moments, those big, pro-Nazi rallies at Madison Square Garden in the 1930s, and everything. But the Marxist left fighting class war rather than the Nazi National Socialist left fighting race war, has been the
Yeah.
dominant version of the left in America, and still is. Marxism
Hmm.
and postmodernism
Hmm.
just dominates our universities and school
Yeah.
system. But what making matters even worse is, and this happened subsequent to Leonard's book, Ominous Parallels. It's like in the last, I don't know, 10 or 20 years, the Marxist left fighting class war has now introduced National Socialist elements, racist elements, because for them it's not
Yeah.
just the rich oppressing
Hmm.
the poor. Now it's the rich whites oppressing the poor non-whites, and they've introduced race war elements into this, which is terrifying because I think they're pushing us towards
Hmm.
towards towards race war. Um, but either way, the left is collectivism and socialism, whether it's pure communism or pure National Socialism or some hybrid, mixture of the two. And I don't know a single book that a single nonfiction book that I've ever read that
Mhm.
shows the political dangers of the left, of the collectivist socialists in the way that the ominous parallels does. And the title is perfect
Yeah,
because
yeah,
Weimar America parallels Weimar Germany. And if you have the intellectual causation that's the same in America as it
hmm
was in Germany in 1920s and 1930s, then the effect is going to be the same. It may not be
yeah,
specifically a Hitler type race war socialist, but definitely a dictator of some type of socialism, and that's where we're heading. And I think Dr. Peikoff has.
hmm
I think again, I don't want to put
yeah.
words in his mouth. I think by supporting Trump and warning against the left during the Obama years, I think he's saying that in the short term anyway, the left is the
Yeah.
greatest danger to freedom in America. Religion may
Well,
be long term, but I think in the short term, he's arguing that the left is the greatest danger. And I'll put this hypothetically: if so, I agree with him. In fact, personally, I would go one better. I think short term and long term, I think the left is more dangerous than religion. Which is
well,
not to mitigate the
okay.
irrationalities or evils of religion. It's just to say that communism and National Socialism are even worse than Christianity.
Okay. We'll go. I have an answer to that. I have his answer to that coming up in the dim hypothesis. But just finishing up with the ominous parallels. Chapter 5, the nation of enlightenment. Okay.
Right.
And this is as beautiful a tribute to America and what distinguishes America, especially those who consider it Judeo-Christian roots. No, he's like, America was born out of the Enlightenment, which was a reintroduction from the classical era and totally stands alone. And if there's anything that will prevent this head on, this parallel, this ominous parallel, whether it's American sense of life or whether it is, and he continues this in the dim hypothesis decades later, um, that could be the salvation, is that America still thinks individualism. All the other forms you spoke about, are collectivism, or whether communist, Marxism or National Socialism, and America, based at least on individualism, sadly has becoming more and more collectivist over the decades since that book's publication. So,
Yeah. No,
Andy, I want
you're right.
to
Yes,
say something, and then I want to move on to Jen. Go ahead.
add something there. You're absolutely right,
Yeah.
and Leonard Peikoff's absolutely right. Germany, Russia, China, Cambodia, places where National Socialism and/or communism came to be politically dominant, had no heritage of individualism and individual rights. There was like zero, in the maybe
Yeah.
a tiny bit in Germany from the Enlightenment, next to nothing in Russia, and in Asia, and
Mhm.
the United States is unique in that regard. That the principle of individual rights is the founding principle of the country. It enables. It's like having, by analogy. Speaking of Leonard's medical background, and Aristotle too, with his medical background and biological genius.
Yeah.
It's like being a robustly healthy, physical organism. It enables you to fight off some virulent, some germs that cause, virulent disease more effectively than somebody who's not as, whose vitality is not as great. So, American vitality in the form of individualism, the spiritual, intellectual, moral vitality was vastly greater than these other countries where collectivism came to dominate. So we're struggling.
Mhm.
We're able to struggle against it, but like you said, um, the collectivists, mostly Marxists and postmodernists, but now they're introducing these, National Socialist, race war elements, even though they have the favored and disfavored races in reverse. Um, they completely control the intellectual culture. I mean, they control the schools of education,
Mhm.
they control the school system, they control the humanities
Yeah.
divisions of our universities. They completely control the intellectual culture. So they're gradually churning out students, from
Mhm.
the high school and the colleges who are indoctrinated with leftist propaganda. So there's still an element of individualism in America, but it's being vitiated year by year, slowly and surely, maybe not even slowly anymore, unfortunately, but year by year, it's being severely weakened.
Mhm. So going to the dim hypothesis, and this will wrap up like at least his written works. Here he's taking, we'll just say dim. We'll start with the I, which is integration. He calls them different modes, and we have the integrated mind, then we have the misintegrated mind, and then the disintegrated mind mindset. And going back to the classical period, for instance, he has different topics, whether it's philosophy, whether it's physics, whether it's literature and politics, and leading figures of the different eras throughout history. So he's trying something that I've never seen to be done. I really like this approach because the way people think affects certainly it affects their lives, and then if you think more culturally, it affects the culture. It's not a deterministic thing. I mean, he makes it clear at the end there's certainly no, because to anticipate what you said at the end of this book, he anticipates a religious dictatorship in America, like long term. But
Right.
the one of the salvations is that when he goes historically, especially through the dominance of different philosophers, the clash between Plato and Aristotle, and then in the Enlightenment era, Immanuel Kant, he says, okay, well, Rand has has the answers to Kant's dominance in today's culture, and I just think that the way he conceived this idea and packaged it into a book, crossing several different fields, it's fascinating. I'll just say that it's a fascinating read.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The Dim Hypothesis is a brilliantly original book. I think Leonard Peikoff now is first. He first and foremost he is the uh, far and away leading expositor of Ayn Rand's philosophy. In OPAR certainly,
Mm-hmm.
objectivism philosophy of Ayn Rand, and in the Dim Hypothesis, I think he established his own place in the history of philosophy. He's a brilliantly original book on the history, on intellectual history. On the
Yeah.
development of ideas. Because you're right, what you said is right. It's broader than philosophy. It takes cognizance of a number of different fields in the humanities and the sciences, and it's a very challenging theory. I can't say
Mm-hmm.
whether I think it's accurate or inaccurate. He may well be right. I have to think about it, study it more, think about it a lot more.
Yes, not
But
an
I
easy
know that
read.
no, it isn't. It's very
Hmm.
difficult. It's for people who know objectivism well, know intellectual history,
Yes.
to a significant degree. But I'll say this: it's an enormously original and challenging contribution to the history of Western philosophy, and needs to be studied in its own right,
Hmm.
without a doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are his major written works, and he's still, as we say, he's still around. He's still, celebrating birthdays, which is a wonderful thing. I'm going to, if I could do one sidetrack disagreement, I'll say myself, and it's on the heels of you mentioning how great the history of philosophy course is. 6 years ago, 7 years ago now, I met my dearest Carrie Ann Biondi, who is an Aristotle scholar and has read him in the original Greek. And I have to admit, whenever Peikoff mentions Aristotle, I usually disagree with his interpretation, whether it is, and I'll give just real short examples here. But the idea of, if we start with ousia, a Greek term ousia, which basically means being, but the translation from Thomas Aquinas is substance. And there's a big difference between substance and being. One is more fundamental, like it's an existent, like the absolute smallest thing you can get to. But due to bad translations that Peikoff has read, he gets the substance uh, interpretation. And the other word is nous, which is in Greek is intellect, but it's often misinterpreted as intuition, written by moral intuitionists. So here's where it really affects the way you read Aristotle. It's going to affect your conclusion about him. And I think Ayn Rand as well read bad translations, but there's been so much good scholarly work that I wish he was like a really, really active, mentally and in philosophy, where he could be presented with these newer versions. We just spent for 6 years, Andy. We've been going through Aristotle's works from an objectivist perspective, and we don't see his Nicomachean Ethics. 18 months, we just finished it. It's not for the noble Athenian. It's for anyone at any time. It is an exact science. Eudaimonia is the highest, not contemplation. So these are the little things that I just have to say I disagree
And
with.
eudaimonia is translated properly into English as flourishing life. Is that
Yeah,
what eudaimonia
flourishing.
means?
Yeah, it's a flourishing. It's like a blooming, the absolute, and so
Which
contemplation. There
integrates
was some.
with his biology
Well,
expertise
let's
or
see.
his
You know what,
biological
Andy? This is my
orientation.
last thing because I don't want this. We're acknowledging Peikoff, but I want to even at that. Aristotle was the first biologist. So whatever
Oh yeah,
Plato
yeah.
taught him, we never hear about Aristotle without the Platonic influence. But wait a minute, as a biologist, he's looking at reality. He doesn't have time for forms and all this other, abstract stuff. And so when he left the academy at age 37, he went to Lesbos, the island of Lesbos. We talked about this, and studied nature and studied, botany and all these other things. So I just don't see him coming back and then all of a sudden creating his own philosophy, and that is just dominant, has these Platonic lingerings. And again, I'll
Yeah.
just close this by saying I think bad translations are a reason for that.
No, I understand that. We criticized Carl Sagan when we did the Carl Sagan show for
Yeah,
failing to.
that's right.
I mean,
That's right.
he
Yeah, yeah.
conflated
Hmm.
Aristotle with Plato, and when he all those years he was a professor at Cornell. I think he could have
Yeah.
gotten Aristotle, studied Aristotle with some of the philosophy professors at Cornell and gotten and done a better
Yeah.
job of understanding Aristotle. I'm no Aristotle scholar. I know Professor Karian Biondi is an expert Aristotle scholar. So I would certainly defer to her, on this in a big way. It's possible Dr.
Hmm.
Peikoff, read bad translations of Aristotle, and his understanding of Aristotle might be flawed. That's certainly possible. I just know peripherally because Aristotle scholarship is certainly not my field, but I know peripherally that there's been a lot of advanced work in Aristotle in
Yeah.
in recent decades.
In the
So
recent decades.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but
So
if we
so
stick to what he does know, which is objectivism, you ask him what's your greatest
right,
achievement, it's that I learned and I mastered and I taught the philosophy of objectivism, and
right,
that's
right,
the
right. No,
stands head and
exactly right.
shoulders.
Exactly right. Leonard Peikoff is far and away the greatest student of Ayn Rand's philosophy, the most brilliant expositor of Ayn Rand's philosophy. He's the go-to source. Anybody, second only to Ayn Rand herself, he's the go-to
Yeah.
source for anybody who wants to understand the philosophy of objectivism. And he
Hmm.
towers head and shoulders above anybody else in that field. And that's the main reason that the overwhelmingly important reason that we honor Dr. Leonard
Yes.
Peikoff on the Hero Show, and thank
Yeah.
him for his brilliant writings, his brilliant
Absolutely.
lecturing,
Hmm.
both both in presenting and explaining Ayn Rand's philosophy, and then in developing his own original ideas in the dim hypothesis. So
Hmm.
I think we should wrap this up and say
Yes.
thank you, Dr. Peikoff. I hope you have
Many more years. Yes.
many more years of robust health to enjoy the living proud, in the great achievements that you've reached, and the benefits that you've conferred on the rest of us. So, Robert, I think we could say, thank you to Dr. Peikoff, and of course to
Yes.
Ayn
Thank
Rand,
you.
who we've already honored on the Hero Show, and
Hmm.
let's tell everybody, ourselves included, let's strive to live more heroically and to lead more heroic lives. And we'll see everybody again. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Hero Show. So we'll see you next week, everybody.